Welcome everybody. Welcome back to our new semester of Shiurim Be'ezer Hashem. Today is the first day of Rosh Chodesh Iyar, Tovshin Pei Aleph, Lamed Nissan, 30th of Nissan, 5781. April 12, 2021. We begin today, Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach, a new Maamer. A very special, powerful Maamer. This is a discourse by the Lubavitcher Rebbe presented Lag BaOmer Tovshin Yud Aleph. The 33rd day of the Omer, the 18th of Iyar, 19. As usual, please open your source sheets so you could follow along inside in the text. And as always, if you go to theyeshiva.net, you'll see that the first video on top, it should say class Monday class, Maamer Sfiras HaOmer, and when you open it, below the video, something called download, and when you open download, you could see, when you click on download, you can download the source sheets onto your computer or print them out, or simpler, on top of the video, there's view source sheets or hide source sheets after view, and when you click on that, you'll see the source sheet near the video. You can also enlarge it. Let's begin. Beis HaMachnalid Lag BaOmer Tov Shin Yud Aleph. It would be worthwhile to mention that this is one of the first Maamorim, the first discourses that was presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe just a few months after he assumed the position of Lubavitcher Rebbe. The Rebbe assumed the position of leadership of Chabad, Lubavitch, on Yud Shvat Tovshin Yud Aleph, the first anniversary of the yahrzeit of his father-in-law, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Rebbe Rayatz, who passed away Yud Shvat Tovshin Yud, the 10th of Shvat 1950. 1 year later, at the first yahrzeit, the Rebbe said his first Maamer, known as Basi Legani Achaisi Kala, Pasuk in Shehashirim, chapter 5, Tovshin Yud Aleph. And this was one of, Lag BaOmer was just a few months later, obviously. So this is one of the first Maamorim, the first discourses that was presented by the Lubavitcher Rebbe after he became a Rebbe back in 1951. Let's begin. Usvartem Lachem mimacheres haShabbos miyoim aviyachem esemenat nufa. This Maamer focuses completely on the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer, counting the Omer, which is the unique mitzvah of these days, beginning with the second day of Pesach, all the way till Shavuos. As we know, we count the 49 days. And the mitzvah is rooted in a verse in Parshas Emer, Leviticus chapter 23, Emer Perek Chav Gimel. And this is a pasuk we say each night after we count the Omer. Usvartem Lachem, you should count to you should count, mimacheres haShabbos, from the morrow of the Shabbos, the day after Shabbos. Miyoim aviyachem esemenat nufa, from the day that you bring the Omer. Omer is a measurement of flour. Hatnufa, which is to be waved. From that day, the pasuk continues, Sheva Shabbosos Tmimis Tiyena, the count should continue for 7 whole weeks, Ad B'macheres HaShabbos HaShvius Tisperuch HaMishim Yom, until after 7 weeks. And then comes V'kraftem, then comes the holiday of Shavuos. We count 49 days, followed by the holiday of Shavuos, which is on the 50th day. V'hainu, what we see in this pasuk, says the Rebbe, Shebetchil tzorich liyas mitzvahs havas omer atnufa, v'achakach mitzvah sfiras HaOmer. First, you have the mitzvah of bringing the offering of the flour, bringing the Omer, and then comes the mitzvah of counting. Because take a look at the pasuk. Usvartem lachem mimacheres haShabbos miyoim haviachem es Omer atnufa. The first mitzvah is to bring the Omer atnufa, and then from the day that you bring it, now there's a new mitzvah, a second mitzvah. What's the second mitzvah? To start a count, which will continue from this day, and it will continue for the next 49 days. What is this mitzvah of bringing the Iyar to know? Very briefly, the Torah commands that during when the Beis Hamikdash stood, when the temple, the Holy Temple stood in Jerusalem, or before that, the Mishkan, on the second day of Pesach, the 16th of Nissan, which is called Mimacharas HaShabbos, the day after Shabbos, meaning the day after Yom Tov. The first day of Pesach is the day of Shabbos, Yom Tov. Shabbos means a day of rest. Yom Tov is also Shabbos. The day after Shabbos, the 16th of Nissan, which is the second day of Pesach, but it's already Chol HaMoed in Israel, in the Holy Land. We do 2 days, but in the Holy Land there's only 1 day, first day of Yom Tov. That's the Memachra, that was the next day. There was a mitzvah to bring it right away in the morning. They would cut it the night before. They would harvest barley and grind it, and of course go through all the processing the barley until they extracted the kernels. The kernels had to be grinded, and they had barley flour. It was refined, they refined it again and again, 13 sieves. And then they brought a measurement called Iyar. Iyar is a certain measurement, a certain volume of flour, basically the volume of 43.2 eggs. And this was known as the carbon Iyar. Part of it was burnt on the altar, on the Mizbeach, consumed by the fires of the Beis HaMikdash. This is called the carbon Iyar. So this is a meal offering. It's not an animal, it's a meal offering, barley flour, burnt on the Mizbeach, and the rest was baked as matzah. First of all, it was Pesach, and generally all the menachas, the meal offerings, were matzah, at least most of them were matzah, and the kohanim would eat it. This was the carbon Iyar. This is called bringing the Iyar, and it had to be waved. Iyar HaTenufa, that's why it's called Tenufa, had to be waved. From when you bring it, you have to start a count. Okay, I hope it's clear. If it's not clear, you can ask in the section when we're going to stop for questions. So this was the offering of the Iyar. That's why it's called Sfiras HaOymer, the count of the Iyar. What does it mean, the count of the Iyar? Many people don't know what it means. Iyar is a measurement. It's mentioned in Parshas B'Shalach about the manna. V'ha'oymer asiris ha'efa. It's known as a tenth of an ephah. It's a measurement. It's a measurement of, in this case, flour. And this is the count connected to this measurement that was brought as an offering in the Beis HaMikdash. The Rebbe continues, mitzvah l'mimnei yoimil, mitzvah l'mimnei shavuah. The Gemara says in Menachos Daf Samach Vav, and that's the halacha, that the mitzvah of counting is both counting the weeks and counting the days and counting the weeks. This will be discussed later in the Maamer in detail, that we learn out from the Psukim that there's 2 counts. There's a count of days and there's a count of weeks. So for example, last night, 2 nights ago, we counted Hayom Arba Asar Yom. Today's 14 days. That would have been enough, but no, we added. It's 2 weeks la'omer. Last night we counted Hayom Chamisha Asar Yom. 15 days, that's enough, but we were not satisfied. We counted also the weeks. 15 days is 2 weeks and 1 day. Now you might ask, it's superfluous. If it's 15 days, we all know that it's 2 weeks and 1 day. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. That will be discussed in the Maamer. But the Gemara tells us, Amara Meimar, mitzvah l'mimne yoyme, mitzvah l'mimne shu. It's a mitzvah to count both. Shemitzvah zuhi ben avasar melachag shavuos. And as this pasuk indicates, this mitzvah applies during the period between the bringing of the Iyar, which was the second day of Pesach, and the holiday of Shavuos. You have that 49-day count. All seems clear and wonderful. But we have to understand what is difficult to understand is the phraseology of this verse that you should start counting from the day after Shabbos. The lechaire kivan shakavon abazay memacharas haPesach havalele meimer memacharas haPesach v'lamanem memacharas haShabbos. The Torah is very ambiguous. The Torah doesn't mean you should start counting a day after Shabbos. That would be Sunday. What's macharas haShabbos? The morrow of the Shabbos is Sunday. The Torah means you should start counting the day after Pesach, the second day of the holiday of Pesach. So it should have said, Mimacharas HaPesach, from the morrow of Pesach, which means Tazria Nissan, the 16th of Nissan. Now you might say, okay, the Torah used the expression Macharas HaShabbos, fine. But no, Torah is meticulous. And not only this, as we're going to see, This triggered a tremendous controversy. Chassidic tov amru shakavane mimachras Shabbos bereishis v'chachmis lo yitzrichim l'svakeach ima u'lohavi raya shekavanas hakasav l'machras haPesach v'im kein lamalei nisparish b'kasav l'machras haPesach l'nam l'machras haShabbos. During the era of the Second Temple, there was a sect of the Jewish people known as Sadducees or Tzedukim. The Tzedukim rejected the tradition and the authority of the sages who transmitted what's called Torah Shabbal Peh, the oral commentary of Chumash, transmitted throughout the generations already from Moshe Rabbeinu. Here, there was a key argument. The Tzedukim said that you have to start counting the Omer always on a Sunday. Every single year, Sfiras Omer starts on a Sunday. No matter when Pesach is, I don't care when Pesach is. Pesach can happen to be Shabbos. Take this year. This year, the first Seder was when? Metzora Shabbos. So the first day of Pesach was Sunday. So the Tzdukim would say, you don't count the Omer Monday. We started to count the Omer Sunday night, the day after the first day of Pesach, Machras HaPesach. They would say never. You always start counting the Omer Metzora Shabbos, the day after Shabbos, with Machras HaShabbos, which by the way means that it's 7 complete weeks, because it starts Sunday. So it always ends 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 7 weeks. You count 7 weeks. So it always ends also Shabbos, which means Shavuos is always Sunday, according to the Tzdukim, because day 50 comes after day 49, and day 50 is Shavuos. And they said it says Mimachras HaShabbos, doesn't say Mimachras HaPesach. And there's a whole discussion in Gemara, Menachas Daf Samachei, Daf Samachvav, a long discussion where the Chachmi saw the sages of Israel had to debate them and prove to them that they were wrong. That in this case, the Torah means Mimacharas HaPesach, not Mimacharas HaShabbos. And there's a lot of proofs. The Rambam discusses it at length in Hilchos Midin Musafir. In addition to it being the tradition that Jews counted the Omer from the second day of Pesach, not from a Sunday, sometimes it happens to be Sunday. If the first day of Pesach is Shabbos, if the Seder is Friday night, so then, indeed, Sfiras HaOmer happens to be Mimacharas HaPesach and Mimacharas HaShabbos. But that's unique. That's rare. In most years, it's not that way. Sfiras HaOmer could be Sunday. Sfiras HaOmer could start on a Monday also, like this year. Asks the Rebbe, if this is the case, why did the Torah have to say Mimacharas HaShabbos? And now there's room for a debate and a disputation. You could have just said clearly Mimacharas HaPesach. Base. We'll understand this by first introducing an explanation and the general theme. What is the counting of the Omer? The Mishnah says in Maseches Sotah Daf Yudalid, Kol hamenacha is boyes min hachitin, v'zu minchas knoi is ba min ha'sa'orin, v'chein minchas ha'omer ba min ha'sa'orin. All the meal offerings in the Beis HaMikdash were brought from wheat. There were 2 exceptions. The mincha of the Sotah and the mincha of the Omer, which means there was a particular situation, a particular mitzvah that's recorded in the book of Numbers in Bamidbar in Parshas Nissan. And this refers to a couple, a relationship that was going through hard times. The husband felt that the wife is disloyal and she's betraying him, and this marriage was on the rocks. He told her, he warned her in front of witnesses, he says, I do not want you to seclude yourself in a private room with this and this individual who he was suspicious of, and they were spending apparently a lot of time together. And she did not listen, and she went into private seclusion with this person. He does not trust her, he feels that she crossed the red lines, and this woman is known as a Sotah. What happens now? This marriage, he doesn't trust her. He feels that this marriage has to dissolve. So the Rebbeinu Shalom, the Master of the Universe, says in Parshas Nissan, I will act as the family therapist. I will be the personal therapist of this couple. Can't get a better therapist than God. And he brings her to the Beis HaMikdash. And she drinks water from the Beis HaMikdash, which had in it dissolved parchment with the Parsha of Sotah on it, and there was a little earth in the water. This was especially potent water. She also brought an offering, a meal offering from barley. If she was innocent, they didn't tell her she has to drink the water. It was her choice. She can admit and say, you know what, this marriage is over. I'm interested in somebody else. I went to somebody else, and then they'll just get divorced. There won't be any penalties because there were no witnesses. There was just witnesses that she was secluded, but not more. So she'll just get divorced. But if she refuses to admit, she says, no, I'm innocent. My husband is wrong. I was in a room with somebody, okay? She'll drink the water, and God will be the therapist. If she emerges healthy and unscathed, we know that she's right. And if not, the water is lethal. Now, which husband afterwards is going to say, God says that she's a great wife, she's innocent, she's wonderful, but I disagree with God. So Hashem himself, it's a very powerful mitzvah, Hashem himself mixed into the relationship, he mixed into the marriage. At some point it stopped working, the famous Ramban in Parshas Nissan, that there was so many adulterers and the men were guilty. This only works if the man is perfectly innocent and he's completely loyal and dedicated to the marriage. So Hashem says, I'm going to intervene to make sure that there is the highest level of peace and harmony and love. But if the man himself is playing games, this whole thing doesn't work, and that's why at some point it stopped working towards the end of the second Beis Hamikdash. Misherabu hamenafim, there were too many adulterers. That's what the Mishnah says at the end of Seit. Fascinating mitzvah, misunderstood mitzvah, but fascinating mitzvah. The Gemara says from here you learn the power of peace between a wife and a husband. Hashem says, we're going to dissolve my name. You write his name on parchment, that portion, and then erase it in the water. It gets dissolved in the water, which is something usually prohibited to do, just to be able to rescue a marriage. This was the one meal offering that was brought, that was barley. All the other meal offering, every day there was a meal offering brought, called a mincha. On Shabbos and Yom Tov and the weekdays, people would bring minchas as donations. Sometimes people would bring meal offerings as different reasons. Obligations or contributions. But they were all from wheat. Minchas knoyes means the meal offering that was brought as a result of the zealousness or the caution of the husband. This came from barley. And one more meal offering came from barley. Which one? You guessed it, the carbon Iyar, the offering that was brought for the community on the second day of Pesach. Why did this woman's offering come from barley? So the Mishnah in Seit Daf Yudalet explains that traditionally wheat was the staple food of humans, for humans. Barley was the animal fodder. So usually we bring a meal offering from wheat. But this person's behavior was Masa Maisa Behema. We know that most mammals are not monogamous. They don't maintain a loyalty in a relationship. So this is what this meal offering represents, that Masa Maisa Behema, Karbana Maichel Behema. Just as these actions were not the ideal actions of a human being who needs to be loyal in a marriage, both on the side of the husband and the side of the wife, each one in their own way. So her offering is also an offering of animal fodder. That explains the meal offering of the Saita woman. But what about the meal offering that was brought on the second day of Pesach before the count of the Iyar? Why was that brought from barley and not from wheat? What's the explanation? On the first mincha, the Mishnah gives us a wonderful explanation. But what about Tzviras HaIyar offering? V'yadua habir bazeh, and the explanation in this is known. This is a famous explanation of the Baal HaTanya. In Likutei Torah in a few places, Shezeu lefi sha'avoid the minchas ha'Iyar u'inyan birur nefesh ha'bahamis. Because the main work of the counting of the Iyar is to work with your animal soul. So therefore the meal offering has to be from animal fodder. In other words, Tzviras HaIyar begins a new era in the calendar where the focus is on working, dealing with, sublimating, negotiating, discovering and really transforming or elevating, inspiring, vivifying my animal consciousness, my nefesh habahamis. That's going to be the focus of this Maamer. So therefore, the appropriate offering is animal fodder. What does that represent? You're bringing the animal to God. You're bringing the animal to the Beis HaMikdash. Not the animal itself, animal fodder. You're bringing the food of the animal, and that's becoming the offering of the Omer. Because the whole focus of Sfiras Omer is going to be what? Is going to be on the birur, on the sublimation, the inspiration of my animal consciousness. And by the way, this is one of the reasons there's a custom in some communities, including in Chabad, that during the days of Sfiras Omer, they learn every year Masechah Soita. Soita has 49 pages, Mem Tes Dafim, has 49 pages, which corresponds to the 49 days of Sfiras Omer. Masechah Shavuos also has that number. Some people learn Shavuos, which means oaths, but I guess it also means weeks, Shavuos. But the custom in many communities is to learn Masechah Soita. So it's not just because 49, every night of Sfira, every day you learn one daf and you finish it by Shavuos. But there's a much deeper reason, because these are the only two meal offerings that were brought from barley. Because the idea here is that there's something similar between the avodah of the Saita and the work of Sfiras Omer with my nefesh habahamis, with my animal soul. And as it says in Zohar, that after the Saita drinks the water, and she comes out unscathed, she becomes even healthier, she goes back to her husband. And that's what happens Shavuos. Shavuos is the time of intimacy, Yom Chasunasei Matan Torah, the time of intimacy, and one is between Hashem and the Jewish people. What does this mean that the time of Sfiras Omer is focused on working with our animal soul? So here begins the explanation of Biyur Inyan, the third paragraph of Biyur Inyan. I'm just a little hoarse. I'm going to go catch a drink. So please, you'll have recess for like 2 minutes. Okay, you could learn the Maamer or meet your friends in class. Say hi to your friends. Okay, my wife didn't want you to have recess. She said she'll bring me the coffee. The explanation in this inyan is the revelation that happens on Pesach, the first time Pesach, and every year on Pesach, the first day of Pesach is known as the Sarusa de La'ela. Sarusa de La'ela is an expression of Zohar, but it's often brought in the writings of Chabad Chassidus, especially in Likkutei Torah of the Balatanya many times, which means the arousal from above. Isarusa, like the word hisairus, arousal, inspiration. De la'ela, that comes from above. Meaning, it's a gift from Hashem. The first day of Pesach, there was an arousal from above mitzad atzmai, independently of a person. As the Pasuk says in Shmois, Hashem tells Moshe, when you take out this nation from Egypt, you will serve Hashem at this mountain. Hainu Tavdun begins after the exodus of Egypt. The exodus of Egypt itself is an arousal that comes milmaila, it comes from above, it's a gift. It's like a dosage of nuclear inspirational energy that's given to the person. You're schlepped out of the mud. You're schlepped out of the abyss of Egypt. But then Hashem says, when I take you out of Egypt, now tavdun es elikim al harazeh. The focus here is not so much, he's not talking here about the mountain, he's talking the tavdun. Now is going to start avodah. Your work, your service. That's stage 2. Before stage 2, there's stage 1, which is I'm taking you out. This is the deeper meaning of the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, chapter 1, verse 4. Shir Hashirim, Perek Aleph, pasuk Dalet. Now tune into this pasuk, because this pasuk becomes one of the fundamental ideas in this Maamer. Mashcheni acharecha narutzo heviani hamelech hadorov. The bride, Shir Hashirim, is of course a poem, a song, about the powerful relationship of ani l'doidi v'doidi li. The young man and the young woman who have deep, deep emotions towards each other. I belong to doidi, to my beloved, and my beloved belongs to me, as the expression in Shir Hashirim more than once. So she says to him, she says, Mashcheni, draw me in, pull me in, Zaymer Moishech, Tzimir Arayin in Yiddish. Acharecha narutza, after you we shall run. Heviyani amelech hadorov, the king has brought me into his chambers. Now, when you read this pasuk, grammatically, your antennas, your alarms should go off in the brain. Why? It starts off Lashon Yachid, it continues Lashon Rabbim, and then it speaks about the past. It starts off Lashon Yachid, future, Lashon Rabbim, future, and then back to Lashon Yachid, the past. I don't know if you realize. Let's see. Draw me in. So we're talking about me. Draw me in. After you, we shall run. You just said me. Should have said Mashcheni acharecha orutza. No. After you, we shall run. And then the king brought me into his chambers. Pshat is Mashcheni kaya lagilim di yitzis mitzrayim shaya b'derech yisarus d'leila. Mashcheni is representing the revelations during the exodus of Egypt, which came as an arousal from above, as we say in the Haggadah. The King of Kings, Hashem, revealed himself to the Jewish people and redeemed them. The Jewish people on their own were submerged, as the Gemara, as the Zohar says, in 49 gates of impurity. However, from above, they had a revelation, something that transcended their own identity at the time. And that's pshat, mashcheni, draw me. When somebody is moishech you are where you are, and then I'll come in and I'll schlep you. I'll pull you out from where you are and I'll bring you to me. Mashcheni, draw me in, pull me out. This is something that's applied. It's related to the person who's pulling you. I, myself, I'm just passive. That's why it says Mashcheni, me. Ki hagili milmayla pal hazaza rak benefesh alikis. Because this revelation, it moved. Hazaza means it moved. It inspired only the divine soul. Because only the divine soul feels, it detects when there's a revelation from above. The animal soul doesn't feel it, doesn't have the antennas to be able to detect. The Nefesh Elikis is on fire. The Nefesh HaBahamis says, what's the party? What's happening? I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't feel anything. Mashcheni. Soon we're going to see Narutza. That's something else. Mashcheni is only the Lashon Yachid. It only relates to the Nefesh Elikis. Doesn't relate to the Nefesh HaBahamis. Because the Nefesh HaBahamis doesn't have the sensitivity. It's an animal soul. An animal is an animal. Animals are cute, but they're animals. we have nothing. We love animals. Animals are very special. You know, I talk a lot about animals in these shir. So we all have a little animal inside of us. That animal could be very, very cute. You know, you have little cute puppies, and then you have scary elephants or hippopotamuses or rhinoceroses or wild cheetahs, tigers, lionesses, polar bears. You got to be careful. Every person has a different type of nefesh habahamis. Some people have a little cute puppy that runs around in your heart, a little cute monkey. But some of us have big chimpanzees or big gorillas, and you know, chimps share 98 or 99% of their DNA with humans, because that's the Nefesh HaBahamis. The Nefesh HaBahamis is a chimpanzee. So there's a small chimpanzee, still cute, but if he gets out of control, and you don't train him, he could get a little monstrous or a lot monstrous. The point is, you can't expect from the animal soul to detect the Giluyim of Pesach. You can't. It's not fair. It's like a deaf person, you'll bring him into a concerto, to a concert hall, and say, how are you enjoying the concert? It's not fair. He doesn't have the ability to be able to sense the music. You'll take a blind person, Khalil, into an art gallery. How are you enjoying the art? They can hear music, but they can't see the art. The person has never seen in their life, or became blind later. You have to know what a person is capable of. You have to have the antennas that allow you to detect, to experience something transcendence. Transcendence can be experienced by the Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Elokis will feel it like this in an instance. What does he say? A hazaza. It's going to make a hazaza. It's going to move the godly soul. But the animal soul, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know why you guys are excited. There's nothing happening here. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, shehakol niyeh b'dvareh. V'zeh gam asher kasa b'yitzias Mitzrayim. And this is why it says by Yitzias Mitzrayim. Ki vorach ha'am. Paroi, it says in the beginning of Beshalach, Vayugad lemelech Mitzrayim ki vorach ha'am. They told Paroi, the king of Egypt, that the nation fled. What does it mean the nation fled? They fled. He gave them permission to go. He told them to go. In the middle of the night, he woke up and he called to Moshe and Aaron and he said, Kumu tzu mitoich ami, arois, get out of here. That's not called running away. If the master himself, the king himself, dictated and instructed you to leave, and not only that, they were rushed to Jews so much that they couldn't allow the sourdough to inflate. The starter couldn't make its magic. They had to bake flat breads, matzah. They rushed them out. So what do you mean kivaracham? They didn't run away. They went with your consent. So what does Rashi say? Because Moshe deceived Paroi. Moshe told them we're leaving only for 3 days. And Paroi sent messengers with the Jewish people. After 3 days, the Jews weren't coming back. So the messengers come back. Ikturin shalach imam, Chazal say. Ikturin, messengers. They come back to Paroi and they say, oh, these guys fled. They seized the opportunity. They were supposed to have a 3-day holiday, as our European friends say. And after the 3-day holiday, they fled. Vayir Rabbeinu Azaken, says the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, Perek Lamed Aleph, chapter 31, the L'cha'eiru Tamua, quote of the Alter Rebbe. L'cha'eiru Tamua, this is so strange. Lama haisa kazois. Why did this happen this way? V'chi'ilu amru lepari l'shalcham chavshi la'olam la'haya muchrich l'shalcham. If the Jews and Moshe Rabbeinu would have told Pari the truth, that he has to send them away forever, for good, he has to emancipate them for eternity, would he have not been forced to send them away? Any way you look at it, it doesn't make sense. If this was coming from Paro's kindness and his own goodwill, and he didn't agree even for 3 days until after the 10 plagues. The only reason Paro agreed for 3 days at this point was because he was brought to his knees after the 10th and final plague. If that's the case, Paro at this point didn't have a choice. Moshe could have told Paro, Parola, we are going and we are never looking back. We are never going to return to this soil. He could have said the truth. And Pari would have said, get out of here, leave, just leave. The man had no choice. His empire was crumbling. His empire was devastated. Every home was devastated with the death of the firstborn, Makas Pcheres. He himself was afraid of his own imminent demise. At this point, he was brought to his knees. Asks the Alter Rebbe, why did Moshe have to say we're going for 3 days? And then they don't come back. And then Pari says they ran away. They could have just been open with him and say, Pari, we're never coming back. And Pari would have given them permission and they wouldn't run away. The pshat is, says the Alter Rebbe, Ella. From here we understand that the Yitzias Mitzrayim had to happen in a way of escaping. The exodus of Egypt could only come about through an escape. There had to be the drama of escape. He gave them permission. So Moshe had to make it in a way where he concocted the story that it's 3 days. And Paro agreed. And now they didn't come back after 3 days, meaning they fled. In other words, it didn't start off that Moshe said 3 days, and therefore they ran away. It's the other way around. Moshe knew that the Jewish people have to flee Egypt. How are they going to flee Egypt? Paro is giving them permission. So that's why Moshe told them we're going for 3 days. And when they don't come back, now they're called. They are people who are escaping. So now the question is, why do you have to flee Egypt? Says the Alter Rebbe, that's all a quote from the Tanya. Because at that point, there was still a lot of brokenness, a lot of toxicity that was very powerful in the souls of the Jewish people. And therefore, if they would not run away, they would never be able to leave Egypt. You see, they weren't running away from Paro. They were running away from the Paro inside of them. They were running away from the evil that lurked inside of them. I can take you out of Egypt, but I can't always take Egypt out of you. You can take a Jew out of exile, but can you take the exile out of the Jew? They used to say you can take a Jew out of Russia, you can't take Russia out of the Jew. What does this mean? This means that I have to run away because I'm running away from a voice that's inside of me. There was an element of Mitzrayim that remained in the heart of the slave even after he runs away. And that is a very comforting idea because it means that you're going to have voices that tell you you don't belong going free. You belong home in the house of slavery. Come back. We spoke before Pesach a few classes about the idea of stealing the Afikomen, right? Stealing the mind of Paro, stealing the blessings, all the same idea. It's the voice in you that says, you're a thief, you're a ganev, you're a fugitive, you escaped prison, come back, come back. That's not a voice outside, that's a voice inside. Kivarach ha'am. Can I go free or not? So Moshe says we're going to have to run away. Who are you running away from? You're running away from a part of yourself. You're running away from your own traumatized victimhood. You're running away from your own triggers. You're running away from those toxic thoughts that tell you that you have to remain imprisoned for eternity. You're running away from the voice inside of you that says that you're not allowed to be successful. You have to be depressed. You have to be miserable. You're running away from the voice inside of you that tells you to be afraid of your own success, of your own light. It wants to make sure that you remain a loser. La'olam vad. Anybody knows about this voice? Rabbi Daniel, they have it in England, this voice. Really? The English didn't emancipate themselves from it? Okay. Welcome to the human race. So this is a Moed Kivart. The Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, Kivarach ha'am. Yitzias Mitzrayim has to happen through brich. What does it say when Mashiach comes? The Navi Yeshaya says, Loi b'chipasen telecha. You're not going to run, you're not going to rush. Loi b'menusa telecha. Nobody's going to escape. B'shuva v'nachas tivasheyam. What's the difference? The difference is Yitzias Mitzrayim represents stage one in history, stage one in personal emancipation. Stage one is that Paro inside of me is still alive and well, and he's screaming, Ganev! Get back, you thug! You're a slave! You're a slave! You're a slave! Battered woman syndrome, or Stockholm syndrome. You come back here, I'll take care of you. This is where you belong. This is addictive thinking. You know, your thought process repeats itself again and again and again, telling you why you belong here. We don't even realize it's happening. It's so deeply embedded. When you become aware of it, that's when you become redeemed. So you have to say, I'm running away. You got to run and don't look back. Why? Because if you look back, you're going to get pulled right back in. The forces are too powerful. The gravitational forces are pulling you back into Egypt. That's what he says in Tanya. When Mashiach comes, it represents a new stage in history where the whole world agrees with you, where there is totality, there is wholeness, there's organic, holistic clarity and oneness. So therefore you don't have to run from yourself, because even the voices that tell you belong in Egypt, you're going to see that the depth of those voices, deep, deep inside, they're also trying to heal you. But that's a very powerful level of development. So then you can go come, you don't have to run. Back to the oisius, to the terminology is Maamer. V'hainu, the kivun shagilui milmayla paul hazazah rak b'nefesh elikis. The revelation only moved the divine soul. Mashenke nefesh habahamis neshara b'tokfa. The animal consciousness was not moved. It remains intact. Hine mitzad nefesh habahamis hutzruch liyus inyan achipozin v'abricha. So because of the animal soul, you have to run. Because the revelation of Yetzias Mitzrayim came from above. The Jews on their own were not vessels for this. They're very powerful. They were not ready for it. They were being transported into a place that transcended them. Their animal soul was not open to this. It was not integrated in the animal soul. So who feels the gilui? The nefesh elikis. People often will sense a moment of inspiration and then it will dissipate. It's like a fleeting moment of excitement. So often they accuse themselves of being liars and hypocrites and ganavim. The truth is, no, your nefesh elikis has antennas. The nefesh elikis feels it. But the nefesh habahamis says, I don't know what you want, stop bothering me. That's what happened. It's a real experience, but it's not integrated into my system. My animal consciousness is not a keli for it. Now, what do we mean by animal consciousness? We keep on saying animal consciousness, divine consciousness. By the way, this whole discussion is in Tanya chapter 31. You could look it up in Tanya, and there he makes the contrast between the Geula of Mitzrayim and the Geula of Mashiach, quoting the pasuk in Yeshaya Hanavi, who says, "You're not going to leave. Lo b'chipazin telechu, b'shuva v'nachas tivasheya." Now, Rabbeinu Chaim Vital, this great student of the Arizal, has a sefer called Shara Kedusha. This is a sefer Eitz Chaim, and he postulates the famous idea, which is quoted in the first chapter of Tanya, and is the basis of Tanya, that every single Jew has two souls, nefesh elikis and a nefesh habahamis, a godly soul and an animal soul. Or in other words, we operate on two levels of consciousness. The level of consciousness that is an animal level of consciousness. We are animals, we're sophisticated animals, Homo sapiens, but we're part of the zoological species. We share DNA, most of our DNA with animals. We have similar concerns to animals. We have similar emotions to animals, or animals have similar emotions to us. You know, the psychologists and scientists and naturalists get very excited when they discover different interesting traits and characteristics in animals, empathy and emotions, and mida keneged mida, quid pro quo, and verbal communication, different sounds. It's very interesting, right? Different types of emotions, jealousy and envy and competitiveness and cruelty and cruelty felt nicht in the jungle, but generosity, benevolence, and so forth. And they really sometimes there's an agenda. The agenda is that we and the animals are more or less the same. Charles Darwin wrote in The Origin of Species that one of the most important conclusions of his theory is that there's no fundamental difference between a human being and an animal. Now that's a tragic conclusion. There is a fundamental difference between a human being and an animal. Maybe for some people there's no difference between a human being and an animal. But that's the great revolution of Bereshis, the great revolution of the opening of the Bible. There is a fundamental between a human and an animal. But the only way you'll understand the difference is if you first understand the similarities. What makes us different than animals is that we are actually so similar to animals. If we weren't similar to animals, okay, we're different than animals, we're a whole different species. The fact is that we're so similar to animals, and yet there's something in us that sets us apart from the animal. The nefesh habahamis really represents the basic biological consciousness of a person, which puts us in the zoological species. It's called Homo sapiens. It's much more sophisticated, yes. It's much more developed. It's much more powerful. It has tremendous abilities and skills and talents that animals don't have. True. But that's only a development within the world of Behemoth. So it's called Nefesh HaBahamas. And that's a very powerful idea. That I can operate my whole life on the level of consciousness of Nefesh HaBahamas. I can do that. It's a full soul. It's a full system of life called the animal soul, the Nefesh HaBahamas. We have a second soul. The second soul is a Nefesh Elikis. It's a godly soul. The godly soul is another level of consciousness, or a deeper level of not another, a deeper level of consciousness, which is the human being, the human soul. As the Alter Rebbe puts it, "V'nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael hi chelik Eloka mimal mamash." K'mo shekasav vayipach ba'apav nishmas chaya v'isa b'zoyar man de nofach mitoichei nofach. I'm quoting Tanya. Pirish mitoichiyusim upnimiyusim shetoichiyus upnimiyus ha'adam moitzi b'nefichasei b'koyach. By Adam, it says Hashem blew into his nostrils a soul of life. Blow. What's blow? The rest of the world is spoken into existence. The neshama is blown into existence. The difference, of course, is speech represents an external expression of energy. You could speak for hours, not get exhausted. Some people speak for years, they don't get exhausted. Blowing is very exerting. About tekeh, you blow the shofar, after 10 seconds, 20 seconds, at some point you're going to have to stop because your whole pnimius, your kishkas come out. The neshama, nefesh alakis, represents something that's a chelik eleikami mal mamash. It's a piece of the divine. It's a divine consciousness. There's an element in the person, the core of the person, that is a fragment of God, a fragment of heaven, a ray of infinity. It's a piece of Hashem. I read an article by the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zechrona Livracha. So he said very interestingly, he says the Nefesh HaBahamas is associated with what we call today the limbic brain. In neuroscience today, there's a huge focus on the different parts of the brain. There's what's called the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. There's the limbic brain, the amygdala of the brain, which some call the reptilian brain. It's the reptilian brain, in other words, Nefesh HaBahamas, because that's the brain that's responsible for survival. It focuses very much on a level of consciousness of fight or flight. It's busy protecting itself. And it's extremely cautious to any danger. And we need it. It's like the alarm system that helps you survive, especially in moments of danger. The problem is when the amygdala takes over, and the alarm system is always going off, and I'm always in that mode. And that's what trauma sometimes does. And then you have higher parts of the brain, the emotional element of the brain capable of emotions. Then you have the prefrontal cortex, where there is the capability of long-term vision and morality and understanding what's right and delaying gratification and seeing the bigger picture. So we see Pashtan science, different parts of the brain that are capable of different ways of experiencing the world and reaching different thought and developing different thought processes which bring out different conclusions. But generally we have our two souls. I could live in two different souls, the Nefesh HaBahamas and the Nefesh Elikis. And this is one of the most foundational teachings that pervades the whole first section of Tanya. That at every moment of life, I have to choose in which level of consciousness I'm going to reside, where I'm going to live. I'm going to live in my Nefesh HaBahamas, and therefore my reactions will be coming from that place, or I'm going to be living in my Nefesh Elikis. Can I get rid of the dichotomy? I don't get rid of the dichotomy. I learn to integrate both levels of consciousness. That's the focus of this Maamer. So therefore, Yitzias Mitzrayim spoke to the Nefesh Elikis. The Nefesh Elikis's antennas are very spiritually sensitive. The Nefesh Elikis is divinity. It sees the world from a divine perspective. It sees the world from the perspective of organic, holistic oneness. it sees the person as a manifestation of divine infinity. That's the Nefesh Elokis. And it gets moved by the inner music of creation. The expression that we had in the previous Maamer, you remember before Pesach, Koyach HaPoyel B'Nifel. It sees the Koyach HaPoyel B'Nifel. It sees the spiritual, organic energy behind the universe. The Nefesh Bahamas is a good animal, it's a cute animal. It's a puppy. I want to eat. I want to survive. I want to feel good. Nefesh Bahamas is threatened. It's going to do everything to survive. Everything to survive. It just wants to survive. That's what it needs. It wants to survive. It wants to feel good. So the Rebbe says, so that's why the Yitzias Mitzrayim was Mashcheni of the Nefesh Elokis. Amnam Achrei Hagili the Yitzias Mitzrayim Hayin Sfirisayim Meshuinyan Avodim Al Mat Lamayla. After Yitzias Mitzrayim now begins stage 2, and that's Avodah Milmat Lamayla. It's not anymore a flow from above, but rather working from below. Al Zenemar Acharecha Narutza. After you we shall run. Hainu she'ein ze ba'ofen the mashcheni milmayla lamata ela ba'ofen sharitza himei atzmai alein loifen shezui avoida b'derech milmata lamayla. Mashcheni is draw me in. I'm passive. After you we shall run. Now I'm running. Now it's my initiative. V'kivon shavoidim milmata lamayla is a shayach gam lenefesh habahamis v'lechein nemar narutza loshin rab sheze poel gazozen gam benefesh habahamis. Now it's not me, it's we. Mashcheni only relates to the Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Bahamas is out of the picture. Acharecha narutz is davoid of Sfiris Ha'omer. Sfiris is integration. Now I'm working with me. I'm working with my amygdala, with my limbic brain, with my reptile, with the animal inside of me, with my animal consciousness. I'm working through my own issues. I'm working through my own reactions to life. I'm working through the consciousness of my animal soul, being aware of what is happening and helping it to climb up the ladder of awareness and enlightenment. After you, we shall run. All the parts of me. It's not just me, it's we. Because inside of me, there is a we. And when you can recognize inside of me, there is a we, you can understand that there's different voices coming from different parts of we. There's the voice coming from the Nefesh Habahamis, there's the voice coming from the Nefesh Elokis. So first of all, the difference between Mashcheni and Narutz is, if I'm being drawn in, or I am doing the work, I'm not being drawn in, I am doing the work. That's a very big difference. When I'm being drawn in, it's coming from above. When I'm doing the work, it's coming from below. Difference number 2 is, when I'm being drawn in, it only relates to the Nefesh Elokis, which senses the divine music. When I'm doing the work, it's coming from me, and me includes my Nefesh Bahamas. So it's Acharecha Narutza, after you, we shall run. What is this work? What is this work with animals? What does it mean to do work with my animal soul? What type of work is this? This is going to explain in the continuation of the Maamer, which we will continue Be'ezer Hashem next year. The next class is going to be tomorrow morning is a women's class, 9:45. Be'ezer Hashem. Thursday morning we'll continue this Maamer, 7:30 a.m. I'm going to take some questions now. Question number 1. Okay, somebody wrote here a very, very interesting comment about that this explains that Rashi in Masechta Beitza about Neshama Yisera on Shabbos, but it's actually on the next piece of the Maamer, so I'm not going to read it now. Next question. Pirkei Avos says, don't speak in an ambiguous way. Make sure that the students understand. Maybe that's why he asks the question, why it says Mimacheras HaShabbos and not Mimacheras HaPesach. The way I understand the starting of the offering of the barley is, Torah was given in the desert. The Jews ate the manna daily, after their matzah ran out, they had animals. What did the animals eat? Did the Jews have barley or wheat to feed the animals? They obviously didn't grow any produce of any type, so what did the animals eat? How did the idea of animals eating barley apply at the time of the mitzvah the Iyar was given in the desert? This was only possible later, once the Jews entered Eretz Yisrael and began to farm. You want to know what food the Jews gave the animals in the desert? Interesting question, I never thought about it. Good question. I have to research it. You spoke about running away and not looking back. Is that the idea of why they told Lot's wife not to look back? It may be very well connected. Don't look back because you're going to get penti safa b'avoinei, because you're going to get consumed by what's happening in Zdaim. Yeah, very possible. In fact, in Parshas Vayera, we have a class a few years ago I gave to the women on the yeshiva.net. It's Parshas Vayera, the idea of looking back. Some people who get stuck in their past and they become salty. They become a piece of salt. The ability to be able to really let go of my past is not easy. The ability to run and not look back. We want to look back. You speak about integrating the animal soul with the godly soul. So it's interesting that we brought offerings of wheat and barley, because Sfiras HaOmer was barley, but Shvuas, the Shtei HaLechem, the 2 loaves of bread, were brought from wheat. You're right, as we will see, because after the Sfiras HaOmer, now you actually bring wheat. It's a very good point. Next question. The Tanya says that the divine soul is enclosed in the animal soul. Does that mean that neuroscience can see effects of the divine soul? Yeah, it's exactly what it means. If the animal soul wouldn't be enclosed if the divine soul wouldn't be enclosed in the animal soul, then neuroscience, which is enclosed in the body, which is enclosed in the brain, the neuroscience wouldn't detect it. But because the divine soul is tucked in, so to speak, not physically, is enclosed, is manifested in the animal soul. And the 2 souls are not living on 2 different planets. They're fused together. They're layers of consciousness, but they're tight. They're not only married to each other, but they're integrated. They become one. The 2 souls live together. The divine soul can only function in the body through and with the animal soul. So therefore you could see the effects of it on the body. And that's why neuroscience is going to come closer and closer to decipher it, at least with the tools that they have, which of course are limited, but they will come closer and closer to decipher it. You're not muted. Next question. Is it possible that since God is above time and He knows the future, so therefore God said Mimacheres HaShabbos, not Mimacheres HaPesach? He was ambiguous just to ultimately prove the Sadducees wrong and the propriety and necessity of the oral tradition. The debate continues today because some Jews try to keep mitzvahs that are written clearly in the Bible, but they will not observe mitzvahs of the oral tradition. So that debate actually still continues. Okay. You can unmute yourself. I hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, sorry. I thought there was a problem. Very quickly, Neuroscience Today, Libet, I think it's a Libet experiment, seems to suggest that our free will is compromised because we become conscious of things after the electric impulses are already there. Does that mean that what's going, which is like related to Kesser, is essentially a transcendent, the point of interface between Ruchnius, and really we can never measure Rotzon. And that's why if you're reductionist and you limit everything to scientific measure, then you come to the contradiction between our experience of free will and the measure of it, which seems to be that preceding our conscious awareness of a choice is electrical impulses. I've always been concerned about this.
You're saying that neuroscientists today are saying that our free will is really a delusion, doesn't really exist, because the electrical impulses of choice, the electrical impulses that decide what you want to do, what you're going to choose, are there even before you made a conscious decision, which means the decisions are completely internal, unconscious. You're not even choosing it, just a result of your biochemical, physiological processes. So how are you resolving that?
Yeah.
So how are you resolving that, Reb Daniel? What are you suggesting?
I resolve it by saying every type of science ultimately only looks at one snippet of reality. And whilst it's true, just like with, for example, creation, you can look at creation and say, like some of the material, like Richard Dawkins, who suggests, the whole world's meaningless and we're just meatballs floating through space. It just happens to be we're conscious. That's his interpretation of the data. In the same way, on the neuroscience level, we all subjectively feel at this level of free will. We live on that. We live within a world of subjectivity. If we were to take that experiment literally, then it should smash the whole of law and order and morality in our universe. And yet we don't do that, because we don't live just on the level of neuroscience experiments. That's the only explanation I have. In other words, our will, our Rotzon, and our functioning of choice is not measurable, and it precedes our electrical impulses. It's just that our measurement of it is limited. Just like you can't measure the motion of a particle and its direction, the momentum at the same time, because it's just not possible. I don't know. That's my thinking.
You're saying, just like we don't have the tools to measure the motion of a particle and its momentum at the same time, we don't yet have the tools to measure how Rotzon and Bechira work.
More than we don't have the tools, we can never have the tools, because it's a Dari Ruchni.
Right. You're saying it transcends our tools, that process, and what they're seeing is only one element of the picture, and they don't have access to the soul's choices.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you're onto something. This is a very, very profound, complicated subject, but I think your point is very well taken. In other words, every scientist, every psychologist, every person needs to always have the humility of knowing that based on the tools that I have presently, I may come to this interpretation and understanding. Tomorrow I may have different tools, or I have to acknowledge that maybe I'll never have different tools. These are the tools that I have, and based on this, I'm putting reality into the box that I find to be perhaps authentic, but I have to have that humility of this is my way of perceiving reality, and maybe I'm unaware of different processes that may be real and may be very authentic and may be deeper. Right? Listen, to obliterate the whole concept of free will, even though it's very popular today, right? It's a very, very drastic move. It really means that no person is ever responsible for anything, that there's no real ability for any accountability. Because
is that not what's happening on a gradual level? We have cases in America, all sorts of cases in America where people have got free or have been seriously mitigated the circumstances on a trial of murder. There's been, I think, there's a case in America where a woman was during menses was acquitted.
Right.
Is this not a result of where we're moving? This is the concern.
Right. There's no accountability. There's no free choice. Yeah.
Could I add to that?
Yeah.
So is it possible that the scientists who measure those electrical impulses which lead up to a decision, they're not measuring every single decision? We don't know how HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps us in certain ways. HaKadosh Baruch Hu guides us, and sometimes he has us make a choice, and then it's built in, so it's now a part of us. And we might be reacting to a decision based off of a previous choice that we've already come to, that we've already made the right choice in.
Yeah. Du sagst gut. Very little bit, you're saying they only have a snippet, a very small part of the data. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, Chevra, thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for your input and your questions and your feedback. I see another question.
Thank you very much, Rabbi, as always.
Everybody have a beautiful and wonderful and inspiring day and a good Chodesh.
Thank you.
Rabbi Stroke, thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Rabbi.